Alrighty, today we are going to be converting decimals and fractions. So we've been working with fractions lately, and we worked with decimals earlier in the year, and now we are going to find the relationship between them. And we also are going to use place value, which you guys have studied and learned up on place value as well. So we're going to use decimals, fractions, and place value to help us convert. If I have the fraction 2/5 and I wanted to make it into a decimal, I would need to divide. And in this case, 2 is the numerator, and I'm going to put n for numerator, and 5 is the denominator. And I'm going to divide the numerator by the denominator. And so in this case, the numerator is actually the dividend, and the denominator is the divisor. So when I divide, I can ask myself, how many times does 5 go into 2? Well, 5 can't go into 2. And if I add a 0, that changes 2 to 20. But if I put in a decimal, that's still the number 2. And since we know how to divide with decimals, all I need to do is bring my decimal up into my quotient, and then I can divide. So 5 goes into 2 0 times. 0 times 5 is 0. 2 minus 0 is 2, and then I can bring down my 0. And how many times does 5 go into 20? 5 goes into 20 4 times. So 2/5 is equal to 4/10, and I can write that up here as well. 4/10. And also, you can look at it like this as well. And if I have an equivalent fraction, I multiply the bottom, or the denominator, by 2 and the numerator by 2. I get 4/10. And you know that this is an equivalent fraction to 2/5, and 4/10 is written like so as a denominator. But 2/5 is equal to 4/10. What if I have the fraction 5/8? Well, like we learned before, the numerator is the dividend, and the denominator is the divisor. So let's set up our division problem. Oops, sorry about that. So 5 divided by 8. And now we're going to find our decimal. Well, 8 can't go into 5, and I don't want to change my number, so I need to add a decimal and a 0. And then I want to make sure that I bring my decimal up to the quotient. So 8 can't go into 5, so I can leave that blank, or I can put a 0. But 8 goes into 50. Well, how many times does 8 go into 50? 8 goes into 50 6 times. 6 times 8 is 48. I need to borrow. 10 minus 8 is 2. 4 minus 4 is 0. And I can add a 0. That still doesn't change my number because of my decimal, and I can bring that 0 down. 8 goes into 20 2 times. 2 times 8 is 16. I need to borrow again. 10 minus 6 is 4. And I can't have a remainder up here, remainder of 4, so I need to add my 0 again. And 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40. 40 minus 40 is 0. So I don't have a remainder. And 5/8 is equal to 625 thousandths. And we can write that up here as well. So I just converted my fraction into a decimal, and these are equal. What if I have 7/10? Well, I could divide 7 divided by 10, and I would add my decimal, bring it up, and ask myself, well, 10 can't go into 7, but 10 can go into 70 7 times. So 7/10 is equal to 7/10, just like we say it. So when you look at a fraction that's over 10, you know that as a decimal, you can write it as 7/10. And you could use the division if you wanted to, or you could just look at a fraction or a decimal and know that 7/10 written as a fraction is equal to 7/10 written as a decimal. What about 15/100ths? Well, we could do the division, 15 divided by 100. And we'd have to add our decimal and our 0 and bring our decimal up and see that 100 goes into 150. 100 one time. 1 times 100 is 100. subtract, and we're gonna need to bring down another 0 because we'd have a remainder of 50. Now how many times does 100 go into 500? 5 times. 5 times 100 is 500, and that's 0. And that is 15 hundredths. So my decimal would look like this. And just if we were going to write 15 over 100 as a fraction, we could write 15 hundredths. Alrighty, what if we have a decimal? How do we convert it into a fraction? Well, if we have a decimal, we can make it a fraction by just reading it aloud. What does this decimal say? 5 tenths. So we could write 5 tenths, or 5 over 10. So if you look at the decimal and you say it out loud, write your fraction, just like you say it. What about 15 hundredths? Well, we saw this one earlier, so you should know it, but let's say 15 hundredths. So it's 15 over 100. What about 3 hundredths? Well, I know since I'm saying hundredths, my denominator is going to be 100, and there's a 3 in the hundredths place, so it's 3 hundredths. What about 3 tenths or 30 hundredths? Well, let's write both. 30 hundredths or 3 tenths, because a 0 lands in the hundredths place, so we could write 30 hundredths, or because this 0, we don't have to have it, we could write 3 tenths since the 3 is in the tens place. But 30 over 100 or 3 tenths, those are the exact same thing. Alrighty, for homework, I want you guys to convert the fractions into decimals, and then I also want you to convert the decimals into fractions. And just as a quick reminder, when we're converting the fractions to decimals, the numerator is the dividend and the denominator is the divisor. So let's set the first one up. 5 divided by 8. And remember, you're going to need your decimal and a 0. Oops, sorry, that kind of went crazy. Your decimal and a 0. Bring your decimal up to your quotient and then solve just like you know how to solve a division problem when you're dividing a decimal by a whole number. Alrighty, have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.